Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to another live stream of Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel and video game news. I guess I am kind of now leaning back towards calling it Master Duel first and video game news second, although in all fairness it really is video game news first still and Master Duel second. I'm not sure I logged in yesterday, so I may have missed a spectate. Like, it's just so difficult to make that part of my daily schedule on top of all the other things I do daily or games that want me to log in daily. Based on player feedback and play data, we've decided to update lower decks and opponents' decks used in some of the chapters in solo mode. So, Gift of the Martyr, Ruin and Demise, and the Mystery of Megalith in the Proxy, or Warriors. They updated the loner decks, not lower. I misread that. Yeah. Okay, that makes more sense. So, Gift of the Martyr, Ruin and Demise, Mystery of Megalith and the Proxy, Pyrrhanaxi Warriors. If we go and check out the solo for me, since I already had done so many of these. Ruin and Demise, Proxy Warriors, yeah, they're not changing the later ones, though. So, the only reason that would help me is if they had updated Legend of the Star Heroes, or Enforcers of Justice, which I haven't even touched that yet. We get these daily quests to do solo missions too often, so and there doesn't seem like there's probably really a system that says if you've done everything in solo mode you stop getting solo quests, even though I haven't actually done everything in solo mode. I've done quite a lot. Maybe I didn't schedule this so much that I didn't miss a spectate. For the accountability section today, it's going to be really easy. I finished Fallout 3. I am done with Fallout 3, both mentally and in actuality. The Point Lookout DLC was the last DLC. I played most of that not really knowing where I even was. I couldn't tell if it was supposed to be just a completely fictional land that was the merger of something like Coney Island and the boardwalk in Louisiana and New Orleans. But actually, Point Lookout is a state park apparently in Maryland, but I had to look that up. They don't even say the word Maryland until you've done, I would say, at least 95% of the main quests storyline. There are more main quests in Point Lookout's DLC than any of the others. Whereas like the Project Mothership Zeta DLC had like maybe 3 main quests. There's about 6 or maybe even 9 in Point Lookout. But Point Lookout doesn't feel like Fallout 3 at all. It feels like you're playing something closer to Left 4 Dead. It definitely feels like it should have just been its own standalone game, or at the very least, because it takes Bethesda so long to release games, they should have held back on the DLC for Fallout 3 and released Fallout 3, then released Skyrim, which Skyrim in every way is a better game than Fallout 3. To the point where I think for the most people, I would suggest just play Skyrim. and that's about the only Bethesda game you need to play. Skyrim, maybe, then Fallout New Vegas, and then maybe the next Elder Scrolls, and maybe Starlink when it comes out. We'll know more about Starlink. But in the decades of them releasing Fallout 3 and Skyrim, had they released just the main game of Fallout 3, didn't release Skyrim, didn't release the first bit of DLC for Fallout 3, then release the first bit of DLC of Skyrim, you could have bounced your audience back and forth. Instead, they definitely were coming from a perspective that there were going to be Fallout fans and there were going to be Skyrim fans, and there would be absolutely no overlap, even though they've built their games completely in a way that there should be a ton of overlap, since it's the exact same engine and the same concepts of gameplay. But yeah. Fallout 3 is a very rough first generation open world RPG that if you were going to remaster, you would almost certainly take the RPG open world elements out and have a much more linear, generic first-person shooter. There's just a huge amount of systems in Fallout 3 that are not implemented and used to their full potential, and they are wasted. Here, apparently, I've decided to get the Mark of the Beast at random here as far as my crystals. And so it's just win ranked duels, duel ranked duels, and activate trap card. But my whining about Fallout 3 throughout the what felt like 200 plus hours of playing it, I guess there's no more reason to play this. Can't even play this. So this is just ended, and they've just left it here so you could, I guess, look at your match history, but there is no match history. So I don't know why they would just leave the exhibition here ended. You might as well just take it off, but then you just have a big blank screen. So I don't know what you really do there. You needed to have, before you even launched that festival, you needed to have something to put there when it ends, to congratulate everybody who participated, to let everybody collect their rewards and see a match history. There is definitely a danger now that I've spent so much time and had this crick in my neck for like a long time playing Fallout 3 that I'm gonna go play something very different. Probably need to schedule videos too, but in playing something different, I may get distracted and I may be too burnt out, and I may never get to that Ni no Kuni game. And the other danger certainly is I do get to Ni no Kuni and it turns out to be a very generic JRPG with the same grindiness that generally I want to try and avoid. There might be a case though that because Ni no Kuni or any JRPG might be more on the nose about you're gonna run through a forest and have a random encounter and fight something, that might be just so on the nose that I can avoid it a little bit more. I don't know particularly how, because effectively what I would be suggesting and what I've always been suggesting here is the to have a somewhat of a speed run through our JRPGs and RPGs, and I just don't know how good of a player I would have to be, and if I can be that good of a player to actively be able to get through that kind of struggle speedrunning a JRPG. I'm also playing Super Auto Pets, and goofing off with that really is about the best way to describe it. It really doesn't feel like there's much of a game there, though, in all fairness. And of course, I'm still having my cell phone play Destiny Child automatically, which setting up the automation on that still takes tons of time every day. But I'm still enjoying the visuals, so I'd still keep playing. But yeah, Super Auto Pets is annoying because I want to get your email for no good reason, and trying to play anonymously after every game they're saying, come on, make an account, which in all fairness, had they just integrated Google sign in, I would have immediately said, okay, sign in with Google, and then Google would give a email of some sort to them. Like the Google Play Games login on Android phones, I think gives either a fake email that forwards to your real email, or just gives your real email to two people that you sign into the game. But there really isn't just a game there. It's a very it's a team management game. Like, every round in Super Auto Pets, you can purchase, hire enemies that have different effects, attacks, and health. Well, not enemies. Characters, pets that fight on your side that have different attacks and abilities and health. And there is only a certain amount of currency. You have like 10 coins every turn to start with by default, and it costs 3 coins to purchase a pet, and it costs 1 coin to re-roll the shop of what's available. As you continue to play through rounds, you'll unlock higher tier characters, higher tier pets you can hire that you could purchase, often having to sell or eliminate in some other way the pets that are already in your stock of, I believe it's 5 pets that you can have on your team. The pets can merge, and when they merge, they get an increase in health or attack, and when they merge a few times, they will go from level 1 to level 2 to level 3, but there is only really a level 3. There are only 10 turns in a run, although it's deceptively difficult to actually win 10 victories in a run. Oh, no, that's inaccurate. There isn't 10 turns in a run, there are 10 victories in a run. Once you've gotten 10, you just have defeated that arena, is what it's called, and nothing kind of happens there. The more victories you get, the more points you get, but points only buy you cosmetic things, which are some of the cosmetic things, are also only available for purchase, or available for purchase and the in-game currency. But it's not like a roguelite where you can't level up the pets or anything like that from run to run. Everything starts at the default. It is a roguelike, Like, in that sense, where you always start at the beginning. But unlike Rogue, no pun intended, there's no real self movement in Super Auto Pets. So there's probably a little bit more you would do in the original Rogue game than you do in Super Auto Pets. And since the game is so simplistic, my programmer mind always leans towards the idea that there really should be there really should be like a programming scripting language so that the game just plays itself completely, since it is so simplistic. It definitely is a game that I'm gonna burn out on in less than a month. Honestly, I shouldn't be wasting any time on it. This guy's doing a lot of things, but I don't think he can actually attack this turn, so I may very well just be able to play this, summon this, destroy everything. So it is a Friday, but there's a little bit of weirdness here. Not just that we have a game here called Put Other Girl, tagged with sexual content and nudity. This would be the weekend where I would have assumed that we are going to see some adult games, but I don't know if we're going to see that many of them, honestly. Running in socks on a treadmill is probably incredibly dangerous. I could only assume even thigh-high socks like this, over-the-knee socks, would just get pulled, or holes would get worn into it. You could, of course, wear socks and shoes and running sneakers on a treadmill. That would be safe, but just socks, I have to assume that it would slowly pull and tear the socks off, and eventually you would just get yanked in a way you weren't expecting and trip. So there's a safety issue on top of this being a low effort sex game from English in China. I didn't see a lot of adult games though. There's really not a lot of anything today. And certainly that has to do with the Ukraine situation. There's Russia invading Ukraine. But that has made the internet, and particularly Reddit, incredibly boring, because it is just a lot of it's just a lot of the same thing, a lot of memes, a lot of hate, no real actionable information. It's like you can find out these things, you can be outraged, sure, and if that's your prerogative, sure, but meanwhile there's nothing else being talked about. To a small extent, Russia invading Ukraine immediately was followed up by reports of China moving warships or airships, I'm not sure if it was boats or airplanes now, closer to Taiwan to eventually invade that. Which I guess at a certain level that does imply that as far as China is concerned, they've completely crushed any independence Hong Kong wanted, and they're now moving on to the next country. But none of that has anything to do with video games, and there's very little that any of this has to do with video games or could have to do with video games. I've seen a lot of IT memes talking about how people all of a sudden now having to spend a ton of time removing Kaspersky security software, antivirus software from lots of computers because it was acquired by a Russian company. But that was a long time ago. That was probably 7 or 8 years or longer ago that Kaspersky was acquired by a Russian company. So people have just been lackadaisical about it, and it probably is a great example of CEOs just not caring about IT. Even the chief technical officers, the CTOs, not really caring about IT enough to say, hey, let's spend this extra expense to remove this Russian-owned software that almost certainly at any point could become under direct control of the Kremlin and the Russian government, if not already is directly under the control of the Russian government. Like any IT security expert would have told you a long time ago not to use Kaspersky, even though it does come pre-installed in far too many computers. But just because there's been a long history of Russian companies hacking and a long theory that these Russian companies are being given the green light, at the very least, by the Russian government, because the only hackers getting prosecuted in Russia were people that would hack other Russian citizens. But yeah, it's not like there's a lot of Russian video game companies or anything about making video games or even computers and consoles that really goes through Russia. Like, it would be a much bigger video game related story, and that's not to say it isn't a big story. It's a very big story, but for video games it would be a much bigger story when or if China gets involved in real conflicts, because it's China that has all the rare earth minerals and all the factories that make all the computer chips that go into every console and computer. And all of this definitely makes a argument against world trade and more isolationist, xenophobic style of trading, each country building their own products within their own borders. I think should happen a lot more. People should grow their own food within their own borders. There is already a ecological problem with shipping food from one country to another country on hugely polluting shipping container boats. But yeah. I suppose we probably will start to see some just anti-Russian propaganda style joke troll meme games. We've already seen a lot of those on Steam, but we might see a lot more. But I imagine anybody listening to this also is either tired of hearing about that, and they almost certainly have a better source for news than me, because I'm not paying any attention to it. So let's get back to video game news. GameDeveloper.com says it takes two. Ratchet & Clank lead the way in the 2022 DICE Awards. which this is the list of the winners. It Takes Two, Deathloop, Ratchet & Clank, Resident Evil Village was giving the outstanding achievement in character for Lady Dimitrescu. Maybe it's just Demetrius. I haven't heard it. Returnal getting a couple awards. I don't know if Returnal really deserves. Well, they're getting audio design awards, but outstanding achievement in story then is given to Marvel Guardians of the Galaxy, which I think that sounds fair. Action game of the year is Halo Infinite, which is weird because I don't know if you really should just have an action game category, and that action game category breaks down to anything that isn't a point and click. Oh yeah, speaking of bearing the lead, the embargo for people talking about the Steam Deck is up, and so I watched 4 or 5 different YouTubers talking about the Steam Deck for them all to generically say they're hyped, but there are clearly some problems. There is a lack of compatibility, I feel like, for a wide variety of games on Steam Deck. There are no Windows drivers, so you really couldn't even begin to think about going through the complicated process of wiping the Steam Deck after making a backup image of SteamOS, installing Windows, then installing SteamOS, because you can't install Windows with a dual boot partition easily, at least when a Linux operating system is already installed. It has to go Windows first and then Linux, which that doesn't even sound right, but that's what Linus Tech Tips said. Like, that doesn't even sound right. It would almost certainly have to be the other way around, but who knows. But a lot of point and click style games, a lot of puzzle games, a lot of hidden object games, things like that, you would think somebody would have gone through them fairly quickly and tested them and verified them as working, and they're not. So even the games that they bothered to test are the AAA, like top 5% of sellers on Steam, versus targeting things that would run fairly very well on a Steam Deck. It does seem like it's pretty useless to use a Steam Deck if you got the cheap one. There's just not enough hard drive space. Even if you got the middle tier one with 256 gigs, is pretty useless. I wouldn't install a Windows operating system on anything less than 512 gigs, and frankly at this point it's probably smarter to probably would be smarter to move it to a terabyte of SSD. Special summon this one, sacrifice this one, put that face up. Go ahead and draw a card. Go ahead and play this. And activate that. Yeah. The Steam Deck final versions do come with the white on the bottom side of the thumbsticks, which visually doesn't look that good. The Steam Deck does kind of make a consistent, not particularly loud and bass, but high frequency, always there fan noise. There's battery concerns, certainly on any battery device. It does seem like it has the beginnings of having a docking ability, but they're definitely not pushing or talking about that docking ability where you can plug it into a computer. One assumes that there is at least the beginnings of controller compatibility. If I was to plug in an Xbox 360 controller into the Steam Deck, I assume that would work, but it's very possible that it doesn't, particularly since it is built on Arch Linux, and in Arch Linux you have to just build every part you want to support. So if they didn't support that version, that feature, it very possibly is just not there. Let's see. I guess she just ended the turn there. But yeah, it would probably be 6 months or later if you tried to order a Steam Deck now. I think a second generation is almost certainly due. The screen, colors, and the brightness are major problems on the Steam Deck, even if you bought the better version of the screen. So I wouldn't suggest that. I have heard some rumors, and who knows if this is still true, that there's a potential that video cards will get a little bit cheaper, and if that happens, anybody who's thinking about buying a video card in the next 3 or 4 years should probably swoop one up and buy it, or even buy pre-built, because their prices might drop down too if individual video cards get cheaper. But I would definitely say your solution at the moment would be to stick to a Switch and an Xbox Series S or Series X, getting those two things instead of a Steam Deck, or instead of a Series X, a PlayStation 4. Or a PS4 Pro, maybe. Let's do this. Okay, well, once per turn they negated that, so then they shouldn't be able to negate this, and I should be able to destroy this. Special summon that, and that. That's going to leave me with exactly 100 health. Just go ahead and set that card like it's a trap. And hope that devastates him. You'd really need a heart of the cards moment here. But yeah. Some of the Steam Link streaming to the Steam Deck concepts I think work pretty good on the Steam Deck, where you have a PC and you're just streaming the video on the controllers. So if you already have a computer and you want a Steam Deck, there might be a solution there. But that would be it. Some of the other streaming services and cloud services don't quite work at the moment, and so, and the suspend and wake up can be a little wonky also. So there's just a lot of things that the first generation hardware or beta hardware that need to be worked on, and it all funnels down into the thought as far as, will Valve maintain their attention on the Steam Deck, or will they just kind of abandon it, like the Steam machines and the Steam Link and the Steam controller and every game they've ever made after the second sequel or the first sequel. I've lost interest in any of these other awards that DICE is giving out, so here's the rest of them. Mobile Game of the Year being given to Pokemon Unite. Let's see. Gamatsu has an article here. A free playable Portal universe short called Aperture Desk Lab has been announced for PC. It's specifically been made for the Steam Deck. So at least there is this extra software that they're releasing. But I don't know if this really is Portal related as far as the game you're playing. It very possibly feels like it is just going to be a collection of little mini games and experiments, in the same way that the Aperture Labs program was just kind of experiments. I wouldn't be surprised if they were experiments they had interns make. There definitely is an assumption that a ton of projects and code just gets canceled inside of Valve, and it never actually sees the light of day. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's exactly what this is just a collection of things that were either going to be completely canceled or released, and they decide to release it only because the Steam Deck came out. And that wrecks me. There's not a single card in this deck that can beat having taken 6,000 damage in one turn. I can bring this. I can summon this. I can summon this and tribute that. I can activate this. I can set this one. And that's that. I looked at the Aperture Desktop trailer, and it doesn't really show anything more than the screenshots does. That's all we can really do. I kind of want to see what they're going to do, but I kind of don't care what they're going to do either, because I'm going to lose. Seems like they're gonna try and summon the Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon. You do have this weird situation where on one hand you would like to see a nice flashy animation when the Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon gets summoned, but for Yu-Gi-Oh! It happens enough that it really wouldn't be that interesting. This may very well drop me down rank. Nope. So we have some weirdness here. G4 TV, which I'm following them on Twitter, but I'm right on the cusp of unsubscribing to them on YouTube, if I haven't already. But G4 TV retweeted, I always called her Olivia May. On Twitter it's spelled ovally, O-V-I-L-E, May. And she put out, I will defend 2D titties until the day's end. And then you get some weirdness, certainly, where because I don't have the audio on any of these, I don't know what music is playing behind this. Seems like it just gets cut at a green screen. And see, here she's in a... she's in a two-piece top, but nothing particularly that crazy. Almost feels like she'd be talking about Sinrin Kagura, Peach Beach volleyball, but why would you be? No, which one am I thinking of? I think it's Peach Beach Splash is the name of it, not Peach Beach volleyball. There was a Sinrin Kagura game where it was basically Splatoon but more anime boobs and water guns, but there would be no reason why you would be talking about that now. And the only reason I'm talking about this now, I got distracted obviously and conceded there, is that, remember, it was only 2 or 3 weeks ago that the Frostcoon employee at G4 was going down the same route and doubling down and tripling down on the same route of video games or objectify women or gamers. Every single gamer objectifies women, and to turn that into a complete 180 and have your narrative on Twitter go in the exact opposite and saying, hey, yeah, let's have a girl who objectifies herself, let's retweet her, and not that I have anything negative to say about Olivia May. Like, this is really what I was talking about even when this whole Frostcoon concept came out and this whole micro drama came out, is that G4 is really not the place to talk about objectification of women, because they always hired actresses who were willing and ready and able to do that. And then there were also people like Morgan Webb who never did that. So there was kind of a even mix. It'd almost be the equivalent of MTV coming out and talking about how it's bad to objectify women when MTV has had their spring break events for many, many years, and plenty of other shows that objectify men and women. Like, so maybe that is a shot across the bow against Frostgoon, who may very well be out at G4, but that's hardly riding a sinking ship as far as G4, because like there was always going to be this problem with bringing back G4, is in the sense that it just had very little chance of being relevant, and it also wanted to come back to actual like DirecTV, I think, so at least some cable channels as a cable channel, so then it has to be kind of family friendly, and compared to YouTubers that don't have to be so family friendly, that feels like they have one hand tied behind their back in that factor also. And unlike YouTubers, G4 is clearly throwing a ton of money behind their production and their hires to try and compete. Even if G4 succeeded by its own scale, really all it would do is become the next Giant Bomb in an era where something like Giant Bomb doesn't need to exist, or be the next GameSpot, or where in an era where GameSpot doesn't really need to exist. So, yeah. You still have, from day one, Adam Sessler and the Attack of the Show guy, Kevin Pereira, saying they didn't really plan on sticking around that long. I don't think I've seen Kevin Pereira at all, so he may already be out in less than a couple of months as far as G4, and Adam Sessler is really doing a lot of voice acting work and just reading other people's games reviews to try and pretend like X-Play is back. I think at a certain level, X-Play is not back unless you got Adam Sessler and Morgan Webb, and they didn't get Morgan Webb. So yeah, trying to bring things back, not smart. Reboots in video games working pretty well, although things like the Life is Strange reboot didn't really work that well. But reboots of video game nerd culture, I don't think are going to work out, because I think at a top level, if you really think about it, if we really investigated it, being a video gamer in the 80s and early 90s was much more akin to being a comic book nerd or a Dungeons and Dragons nerd. It was a niche audience in which you had to really struggle to fight against the isolation there of being the only person in your school that plays video games or talks about playing video games, or being one of only a dozen people in your school that talks about video games or plays video games. And while that is still pretty much true for comic books and Dungeons and Dragons, I imagine kids these days probably don't play Dungeons and Dragons anywhere as much as they may have in previous generations. It's not true for video games. Like, well over half of every kid plays video games, and you're basically the weirdo if you don't play video games. So yeah, I would definitely see why there isn't really that need for that kind of counterculture TV. Plus, kids don't watch TV. They watch TikTok and maybe a little bit of YouTube, but I would argue they very well may not even do that. I should have played this first. So, yeah. That was pretty much dead in the water. Let's start covering some of the games here. Grisaya Phantom Trigger Volume 8 as a visual novel is out. And while this game isn't tagged as having adult content, there is a wide variety of age-looking characters here. Here you have a very young-looking character, and then here you have a much older, big-breasted, cleavage-showing looking character. And then you have another screenshot with basically an upskirt shot. Then here you have another young-looking character and older characters. Let's make sure we actually play. I believe the Grisaya Phantom Trigger series definitely seems to have some relevancy to it. Okay, I couldn't attack, so I would put this on the follow list. But you do have this other problem, certainly, in that if this is volume 8 for $30, getting the whole series would be a fairly expensive endeavor. One would hope that the Grisaya Phantom Trigger series, volume 7 here is $19.99. You were gonna try and go through this. Volume 1 here is $4.49. You can see it's rated very positively for volume 1. There's more blood and slightly different animation style here. What looks like different characters, but it might actually be the same characters, just slowly aging up over 8 volumes. It is definitely weird, though, to have 8 volumes of a visual novel. Next, we just have what looks like a mobile port from a Chinese game. Free to play, Chinese only. Next, we have exactly the same mobile port of a Chinese only game. Here we have something called The Game, which looks like one of these RPG Maker horror games. The animation doesn't look quite good enough, and just calling your game The Game doesn't really make sense. It's not good branding. English and Portuguese Brazil on those languages. 1001 Jigsaw Legend of Mystery. It is Friday, so Fridays tend to not be watched very often anyway, so it wouldn't make a lot of sense, obviously, no to another puzzle game. They released Legend of Mystery 2 just a couple days ago also. But finishing early, seeing if I could get around to building another shelf. I'm messing around with the LEDs and placement of the LEDs, and predictably the backing tape on the LEDs I bought could not hold the LEDs in place even for a few days. It just doesn't seem like it really cures. At least it doesn't cure when attached to vinyl fake wood. This looks like garbage also. So I'm gonna have to glue it. I'm thinking just using wood glue, but there might be an argument against or for using something else. But my main concern is because these are bookshelves turned 90 degrees that are designed theoretically to be turned 90 degrees. They're not built particularly well, or like they could actually hold much weight. Each of some of the shelves can only hold about 30 pounds, which is a really low amount because they have these tiny little vinyl pegs in them. But since these are bookcases that are turned 90 degrees that are going to be back to back with each other to turn them into a table, a very long table, the place where I was going to put the LEDs is going to be just wedged in this tiny little crack between the two bookcases. And since the LEDs I have aren't side firing LEDs that would light from the edge, and then instead they light forward, it is very possible when two bookcases are back to back, the LEDs, even being incredibly bright, will just get completely blocked off, and there will be very little to no light actually coming out of them. And the LED controller I got was one with a remote, and I wanted one with a remote, and it's mostly designed to be controlled by audio. I tried controlling it by audio, and it kind of works, it kind of doesn't. It's a little slow to respond, I would think, to the audio input, and that might be the TV it's going through and the wire it's going through, certainly, but yeah. I really wasn't thinking I would actually use that feature, but it probably would have been just as well to have gotten the other controller that was suggested to me, which would just be controlled via Bluetooth app. But I didn't really want yet another thing controlled by a Bluetooth app. Although I have seen a controller that seems to be a lot smaller for LEDs that maybe you program once with a Bluetooth app, and then whenever it gets plugged in, it just stays that way. And it also handles the power input a little bit better. Because like the controller I got doesn't do anything with the power. It doesn't have a barrel jack going into it. So there's 5 different wires that you have to connect to the end of the LEDs, and I'm gonna have 4 or 5 LED strips in a row and hope that that's enough power to make it all the way to the end, and we don't start to see dimming at one edge. If I do see dimming at one edge, then I'd have to inject more power into it. And I'm really just hoping everything works out. If it doesn't work out, I'm gonna have to rethink where I put the LEDs and how I put the LEDs, and it could really just lead to quite the mess. It could lead to a lot of drilling of holes and running of wires, and a lot more soldering. Moving on back to video games, we have something here called the Lotus, which again just looks like a mobile game. Free to play. It says it's English only. Kind of feels like a physics-based Tetris game, or a 2048 game. If this was widescreen, I might have given it a consideration, but it isn't. And it being labeled as English only is a little weird. Next we have something called A Perfect Day, which looks like it's kind of an adventure visual novel game. Again, Chinese only. We're seeing a long run here of Chinese only games. I wonder if the Chinese video game companies are trying to get the last bit of money they're gonna get before their own speculative invasion of Taiwan. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if by this time next week China invades Taiwan, and all of a sudden we start to see Steam potentially blocking Chinese companies. There is, and this is barely video game related, but it might be slightly video game related. There is real talk here of actually stopping some money flowing from one country to another in the middle of these conflicts, particularly Russia, kicking them out of the SWIFT financial transfer system has been called for, I believe, by Boris Johnson of the UK, which, yeah, if all of a sudden the banking, the financials, and the world trade stuff gets stopped, then we probably would see no more Russian games on Steam or Chinese games on Steam if China invades Taiwan and the same thing happens here. And frankly, there is definitely a lot of, I think, legitimate anti-world trade argument to be made in that a country could literally be at war or antagonistic to world peace in general, and yet big companies and oligarchs still are able to operate as normal, and the economy is still allowed to operate as normal, because part of the argument of the United Nations and more a world trade was that you would have economic influence and you could stop countries from going to war flippantly for minor resource conflicts. But I don't think there really has been any evidence that has actually worked. If anything, there's definitely an argument that it's gone the opposite direction, and there have been several conflicts, particularly in like South America, from the United States, that have been encouraged or created to benefit companies and oligarchs in the United States. And those are the stories I'm aware of, or slightly aware of. I bet that's happened in a lot of places. Back to video games. The Adventures of Mr. Hat here looks like nothing of interest, so we can say no to that. Avatar Raiders. It's seemingly just this giant background screen for kind of an idle game. I guess what this is supposed to be is this is for Twitch streamers. So that would explain why it's smaller. It's a game for Twitch streamers when they're playing other games. But I don't know if I want to see these kinds of software, that's pretty much what I would call it, on Steam. I don't want to really see a lot of people get encouraged to try to be Twitch streamers when there's, to my mind, not a single example of a Twitch streamer who's managed to make it big and not in some other way ruin their lives and their future potentials by getting in some kind of controversy. And honestly, I just don't feel like Twitch streamers do very good work. Not to say that I do very good work, but the concept of just having the live stream 8 to 12 hours or more every day, just playing often the exact same game day after day after day, and really only being there to interact with the chat and just beg for donations. It doesn't have much to do with gaming. I don't see real professional gamers on Twitch much. Nor do I see video game critics on Twitch. Basically none of those exist as far as actually doing a fair use criticism of the game, which clearly that's not what Twitch's audience wants. And the best example I've seen of Twitch making sense, other than just being a early days potential competitor to YouTube, at which point it kind of made sense for Twitch to exist, is when you watch somebody play something that is either software or a game that they're developing, so the general populace can't get access to it, or they're playing something like pinball tables, where pinball tables are incredibly expensive and difficult to maintain, so it would make a lot of sense to want to watch somebody else play something that not everybody can have. And that gives me kind of a fine excuse to talk about this pinball system that I just heard about, because they announced a Weird Al licensed pinball table. It's called the, I believe, P3 Metamorphic pinball table, and what it is definitely a step further in an idea I was thinking about 6 months ago, maybe a year ago, as far as trying to have a modular pinball table where things could come in and be taken out and replaced, something where you potentially could have a fairly expensive open loot box style service, and every month you would get a new item to spice up or change your pinball table. The P3 Metamorphic doesn't have a loot box system, although it probably should. What it does is it has the bottom 2/3 of the screen is always this LCD screen, and floating above that is the flippers and the normal, a couple of virtual side bumpers, what are they called? Drop targets, virtual drop targets, and a left ramp and a right lamp that connects to the top 1/3 of the screen. At the very border between the top 1/3 and the bottom 1/3 of the bottom 2/3 of the pinball table, there is a scoop system that has, I would say, about 10 or 12 different it has about 10 or 12 different scoops in a row that can pop up and scoop the ball down into a bin, which is where the ball also launches from, because there is no side rail launcher in it, and I don't particularly know why there isn't a side rail launcher. That seems kind of silly to miss out on that first aspect of an average pinball game, but that is just one of the many compromises about the P3 Metamorphic system. And behind the scoops, or maybe in front of the scoops, I'm not sure, there's another row of pop-up drop targets. And so with the pop-up scoops and the pop-up drop targets, you can add a lot of things, dynamic elements to a pinball table. And the lower 2/3 touchscreen is effectively a touchscreen that uses infrared lights, so it actually knows where the ball goes in the bottom 2/3. But the real interesting part here of the metamorphic system is the top 1/3, which completely just pulls out and gets replaced. So if you want to play their last game, the Heist, that was their best game, I think, up until potentially this Weird Al game that's just been announced, you would put in the Heist module in the top 1/3, and on that is a real pinball setup with real ramps, real chutes, real drop targets. Everything is designed sort of to have screws so you could take off the faceplates and reskin things. Even the side art of the pinball table, it has like magnetic side art that you can peel off and replace. So it's not like the heist module just lets you play the heist. It lets you play the heist and a couple of other games that are also compatible with that. And on the sides of every top third module is a ramp return for the left and right in lanes of the pinball table. So yeah, that's an interesting idea, although at a certain point you might as well just replace everything in the pinball table and not have the LCD screen be anywhere as big, because it's not an LCD screen that has holes punched out like the camera holes in cell phones. So to actuate the flippers and move the flippers, there is actually these pieces of metal floating above the screen that just yank the flippers down and up, instead of it being directly connected to a twisting motor. Same is true for the rubber band kickbacks that protect the in lanes. They're again attached. So you have these four little sticks that are just always moving up and down at the very bottom of your table, and that's visually distracting. Although in fairness, I didn't see it until the first time I looked, but once I did see it, it was blatantly obvious. And so you have compromises there, but you're playing with a real pinball table, real pinball, and the top 1/3 is real pinball elements. So it is this interesting middle of the ground pinball table, and I love Rydo, so I'd like to see this potentially be the beginning of a improvement of a P4 system that would have some level of improvements. But the big compromise there is, if you had the 4 or 5 different modules that are available for the P3 metamorphic pinball table, you're really only going to be able to play maybe a dozen games, and the price is just ridiculously expensive, even compared to the ridiculous price of pinball tables. Like a single pinball table, brand new, would set you back $6,000 or $7,000. The default setup is for the P3 metamorphic system is at least $8,500. To then get the standard edition of the Weird Al metamorphic module, it's not like, oh, this top 1/3 of mechanics is being sold for $300 or $400. No, it's being sold for like $1,200, and that's the standard version. I think it's another $400 if you want the limited edition version. So all in all, you're compromised because the bottom 2/3 of your pinball table doesn't feel like a pinball table. The modularity is not super modular. You're really just pulling out basically the entire 1/3 of the playfield. You can't just remove one ramp or one toy. It doesn't seem like there are any crossover ramps, so the return, if you shoot something on a left ramp, and it probably is always going to come down to the left flipper, and you'll never have a target or a pot shot that shoots on the left and then comes out on the right, so you can do crisscross shots. It's just a lot of compromises, and the price really kills it as an idea once you know that price. If they could get the price down, it would probably be slightly better than the At Legends pinball tables that are like sold at Costco, the ones that are not actually the size of pinball tables and are 100% digital, but it's not as good as the Australian, I think it's called Extreme Games pinball tables, which are full-size digital pinball tables that come with hard drives full of emulated, possibly copyright infringing pinball tables. There's a lot of extra features in the Extreme Games to get the audio right, to get force feedback right, and they're seemingly just constantly working on improving that also. So it definitely feels like, of the options, you probably would want to get the Extreme Games digital pinball table, or buy just a average real world pinball table and hope it's not too damaged and easy enough to maintain. And doing any of that, of course, will be very expensive. And of course, with the digital versions of pinball tables potentially existing, something like this metamorphic Weird Al table very possibly could be copied and simulated in visual pinball very quickly. So you have that update path. But I would say the P3 Metamorphic definitely gave me some concepts and ideas that if I was going to build my own modular pinball table, what I would do. Like, I would obviously have an LCD screen at the bottom of it. I obviously would have holes poked out at the bottom for screw placements. But then you would have to be very careful as far as the mount points. Whereas having holes cut into the screen for flippers makes sense. You'd also want zipper flippers for the few games that had that effect. So it would be more like an oblong. No belong type hole for the flippers. But then once you start getting to mount points higher and higher up the table, you're going to have to start having some very specific spots where there would always be a peg, and that peg would always connect to something. The game went really long, but we won, so can we really complain that much? Also, the amount of rewards you get, still not really great. And 8 gems is an oddly small number. Scoops and drop down targets and things like that, though, would still be things that we'd really have to think about. If only there was a technology where you could cut holes in an LCD screen and then patch the holes and put them back together. Or make it so the lines aren't very noticeable. If there was a hole. or if it was a modular system where you had a bunch of square parts of different LCD screens all connecting to be one giant LCD screen, and there was no bezel and no edge to that. Or it was just like incredibly cheap and easy to send new LCD screens or make new LCD screens. I think you could probably definitely have a table that had a standard layout and then just reskin that standard layout for several different types of games. But it would be kind of like turkey feathers where you'd put the pegs. And so an up lane shot originally may just go straight up into a scoop at the very back of the table. And then 1 month you would get a loot box and you would change it so that the diverter went to the left and looped out this way. And then the next month you might change it so it goes to the right and it loops out there. And then the next month you may just put a cap here, and that cap will act as some kind of like just kickback target that you hit, and then there's a cross wave shot there. And then there might be another loop horseshoe shot here that you sometimes would remove this and cap this, and it might be a second crossover shot. Yeah. A lot of the mechanics and gimmicks though would just have to be reinvented from scratch, which that is the beauty of pinball, is that every gimmick is basically a new gimmick with every new table. Yeah. And you do want like a fast transition. The P3 memorphic pinball table, and I'm talking about pinball instead of video games here. I hope people don't mind too much about that. Claims you can swap things out in about 30 seconds. In reality, I think you're going to take at least 5 minutes to take the glass off your backboard, unless you're just going to play without a top glass, which streamers actually should do that. So, but then you're going to get dust and dirt in your table that much faster. We might get some quick victories here because of server problems. But yeah, if the back glass was missing, maybe then it would take you 2 or 3 minutes to swap out the panels, but then it's going to take you another couple minutes to boot up the system and have it really ready to go. Pop-up bumpers are one of the things that are completely missing from P3 memorphic system. Seems like maybe there's some thoughts of adding pop-up bumpers, or maybe one version or variant of it as pop-up bumpers, but those were the things that always took up the most space and the most amount of electronics. And with them missing, you're really not playing pinball at that point. So yeah, even my idea, if I could actually design it and somehow actually build it, which almost certainly would never happen, it still runs into the problem of just being a compromise versus playing real pinball, when it would make a lot more sense to simply just go to something like the Texas Pinball Festival or any pinball festival that's big enough once a year and just playing pinball and burning yourself out at that, which they are doing the Texas Pinball Festival on March 25th to the 27th, and if you can get there, it seems like a decent convention type festival to go check out. Some of that is going to heavily depend on just how safe you feel going out with public at the moment. But and I guess just how much you would be willing to spend, because it is like $75 for an adult 3-day pass, which isn't that expensive. Moving on back to video games, we have the Sacrificial Girl of Fantasy of Three Kingdoms. I assume this is a Japanese RPG with some lewd imagery. It's tagged as having nudity in it. But then you look at like this art, and this looks very different from this art, which looks very different from this art. So there's definitely not a level of polish on this. This looks pretty bad. Even the price is pretty bad. And oddly, it's Chinese only, not Japanese. I would have leaned more into thinking it was going to be a Japanese game. Let's see. Next we have Kurakashitra Ascension, which is, I think, Indian, if not Middle Eastern. It says Indian mythology. I guess Indian might be considered Middle Eastern too. Looks like it's a player versus player, free-to-play collectible card game. I am a sucker for those, so I'll put that on the fall list. With the Indian lore, there might be a real argument to checking that out as a spotlight, although I seriously doubt I would jump from Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel to something so incredibly new and small, and unlikely to become a big thing. If anything, it was probably a bit of a mistake to jump to Shadowverse, and I am definitely questioning whether I'm ever going to find the free time to go back and finish the story elements of Shadowverse. I should, particularly now that I'm done with Fallout 3. Moving on, we have Medieval Fantasy Survival Simulator, which looks like it is just 100% text, so we can say no to that. Second Person Secret Laboratory. That game Soul Hunters that I talked about in either the last stream or Monday's stream, apparently is part of the Devil Summoner series from NIS. So Soul Hunters 2 is a series, and which I kind of assumed it was. I don't know if the Devil Summoner series is also part of the Shin Megami Tensei series. Let's see if this works. It makes sense to summon things out of your hand because that reduces the number of these characters that are in your hand. This only activates once per turn, so let's see. Next, we have a game on Steam here called Color Lab, which I don't think there's enough of a polish visually here for me to want to play this puzzle game. Yeah. No to that. Here we have a game called Vitality Girl 2 Fire, which, again, not enough polish. So, no to that. It's pretty much the case here. Bistro Days. It's basically the visual novels and the anime girls are the only thing making it to the fall list, with the occasional first-person shooter and horror game. This could be good, this could be bad. I suspect it's going to be mediocre, English and Chinese, but I'll give it a chance. At least the art on this looks decent enough and consistent enough to give it a chance, where most of the games just look like there's no attempt at all. Here we have yet another low-effort Chinese game. Zombies Ate My Dog, which I assume is trying to evoke Zombies Ate My Neighbor, but looks like it's just kind of a generic top-down twin-stick shooter. Alright. Give me one of these. Activate this. Special summon this by triggering that and that. Let's do this. Yeah. No, the zombies ate my dog. Too simplistic. I will point out it's an English only game. Wayward Harbor. Looks like a horror game with a mirror reflection effect. It can only be seen in a reflection. That's an interesting idea. Kind of feels like something that should be a student project. Well, I can put this on the fall list, but as a free game, I don't know if there's anything really to say there. If that intrigues you as a concept, check it out. If it doesn't intrigue you as a concept, then obviously don't check it out. Here we have a game called Initium Legenda, which looks like a very poorly designed RPG. So note of that. Here we have Alien Shepherd, which looks like a precision platformer. We're still seeing a lot of these week to week. Obviously note of that, because that's not the kind of frustrating game I want to play. I don't want to play any kind of frustrating game. Here we have a game called Safe and Sound Indie Game, which is a generic survival adventure game that is Portuguese Brazil only, so note of that. Here we have a game called Debt Chasing Treasure, which I'm fairly certain is just a horror asset flip game with some dark screenshot syndrome. So, yep, no to that. English, Turkish, and German in the languages. That's a little odd. Let's see. Will this guy be able to defeat me? Or is he just buying himself time? Here we have a game called Clock Knockers 2 that I think is probably just an asset flip game. Apparently time is frozen, so they didn't have to buy any animations for anybody. So you can just walk up to people and knock them over, and they'll just float in space, so they didn't have to attach any physics to the 3D models. This feels like the first game I've ever seen where it is so completely unfinished that they had to create a ridiculous premise to explain why the game is the way it is. At the very least, while very little effort is put into a lot of games, they tend to feel like they are feature complete as far as the one or two features they intended the game to have, whereas that feels like it is not feature complete at all. Alright. Let's do this. See if this wins. Let's see. Attack here. That was a mistake. Attack here. Actually, it wasn't a mistake. Nope, it was a mistake. I should have attacked with this first, then attack this, then activate this ability, attack directly, then attack directly. I would have won on that turn had I played correctly. Well, I've given him an opportunity to summon an 1800 character and just attack here and he'll win. This definitely was grasping defeat from the jaws of victory. Moving on, we have a game on Steam here called Astro Mission Moon, which looks like it's kind of just an infinite runner platformer game. It really suffers, it's really cheap, with it having a white moon background with not very much texture and then white foreground characters. It's just visually difficult to discern. Here we have something called Showbiz Tycoon, which we can obviously immediately dismiss for not really having any visuals. I am shocked I won there. I am really shocked I won there. And we're just back up to tier 4. And we're still just getting a lot of normal cards. It does feel like 6 months to a year in, I probably will have one of every normal card of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Collection. Unless they just really do a good job of introducing some of the newer cards into the game. And there's a lot of newer cards. Here we have something called Apis, which looks like it's a spinning kind of asteroids variant. Doesn't look particularly interesting. English only. Here we have yet another search things. Flooding the Steam market. Here we have Cube Runk, which looks like nothing of interest. English and Russian on that one. Waiting for a response. Here we may get a quick disconnect, which may help us get a win streak, which may then help us get higher up. Although I'm not sure win streaks actually exist anymore. That is just like the ideal scenario though. 3 rewards for playing less than 1 turn. Here we have a game on Steam called Shoot, which seems like it's cardboard cutouts of things that you shoot at. and otherwise just kind of generic VR environments that aren't that polished. Let's see, it requires VR, 21, 24. And see, the funny thing is, this is basically Duck Hunt. Duck Hunt wasn't that visually appealing or anything. So, taking Duck Hunt to VR kind of makes sense, but so much time has happened now that I can't really hold this game to the standards of when Duck Hunt came out. So I have to say no to it. So that should be like a 3-win streak. Win streak in current rank is 5. And it still seems to say I need 3 more victories. Next we have a game on Steam here called Mini Golf Maker, which oddly, there have been Mini Golf Maker games before, and they've never actually shown off the Mini Golf Maker part of it. Maybe there haven't been Maker games. Maybe there's just been a lot of Mini Golf games. I guess the question really to ask is, how much do you love Mini Golf? How many people would really want to do that? It seems like in its final form, it does look pretty great, though. So I guess the question is, does it have multiplayer? Yes. Is it overly expensive? No. Is there DLC? No. So the only thing I'd really be concerned about is potentially having to make your own mini golf maps to begin with, that it doesn't start with any examples or just tutorial levels, or that it just doesn't really have that sharing ability that it really should have. Like, there should be some way to find people making nice designs and sharing it. Built into either the Steam Workshop compatibility or into the game itself. You can actually see it does say it supports Steam Workshop, and really at this point I think people mostly would have forgotten that Steam Workshop exists. Okay. Let's do this. Let's special summon this. Sacrificing this. Put that in the face position. And attack here. Give me another ritual monster. And we could do this to summon this if we wanted to. Or we could do this to summon this if we sacrifice that. There we go. We had no choice but to attack with this. And then attack with this. So yeah, Mini Golf Maker should be on the fall list. Next we have a game on Steam called Deliver or Die, which looks like it's a top-down racing game. What's funny is the text is kind of big and it's kind of zoomed in, so it does feel like it's trying to adapt for modern screens that are maybe a little bit further from people's eyes and more of a TV experience. And so I don't think I can just immediately dismiss this, although more than likely I will dismiss it because it will just never have any relevancy. This is very akin to something you'd see in an early 90s arcade game, not a 2022 video game. Here we have something called ASCII, which looks like it is an ASCII rogue-like, and it's just a mix of color that would really distract me. And I suspect this is just background art outside of this box, and so that's just more visual distraction. Yeah, I think I'd have to say no to that. That one's English, Russian, and French. Next we have a shoot 'em up called Space Dragons, which doesn't look like it's nicely animated. It really feels like a very terribly early 90s anime style. Like, it's frankly a little questionable who would even have the skill to animate things that way still. Keep on attacking. Just trying to do everything. We should just let him do everything. Let's see. Here we have a game on Steam called Dark Blood Reborn, which again looks like a very early 90s dungeon crawler. Arguably, though, a game like this, compared to just like Fallout 3, might be faster for similar levels of elements. Like, because in Fallout 3 you do spend a lot of time just wandering from point A to point B, whereas if it was just pressing up once on the cursor to move to the next region and move to the next encounter. Alright, let's see what you can do with that. But yeah, I could not justify playing something that doesn't have relevancy that looks like this, and I don't think there really is too many games that do have relevancy that looks like this. It's really just a genre I don't think too many people got into as far as dungeon crawlers. Next we have Amiko's Pledge, which looks like it's a platformer but not particularly well animated. So again, I would have to reject that outright. It's too cheap also, so that doesn't establish any real hope. Not seeing a lot of adult games here. We really only saw one. Here we have a game called Biku, which that could be scary certainly too. This might be the beginning of the end as far as adult games being allowed on Steam. Maybe they let the one game with nudity in because it was kind of grandfathered in, and they've just started to outright censor or reject any further adult games. There's been no follow-up as far as the Agony unrated version. So who knows who was responsible for that or what's going on. As for this game, Biku, doesn't really look like it's more than just a platformer hack and slash game. It's not really grabbing my attention, so no to that. Next we have Baptism of Fire, which is another RPG game. English only. Here we have a game called Dungeon Crawler, which also doesn't look like much of anything. So no to that also. Yep, we really are getting to the point where I need to stop saying no in general, even from the standard just like yes-no system, instead of really agonizing over whether to put something on the follow list or not. I need to get rid of the negativity in the word no and instead highlight the positivity in the yeses. So I think I'm gonna have to just retrain myself to talk about the game, say the price, say the languages, and then just stay silent. Yep, he managed to wreck me. But yeah, and when something does make it to the follow list, I need to highlight that and say, yes, that's going to the follow list. So we have Demolition Race here, which is visually polished a little bit better than average, but I don't think there's enough game there. And then we have a game here called They Die Tomorrow, which just looks like a horror asset flip game. $14.99 in English only. Here we have a game called Crate Mates, where it looks like you're just pushing boxes and you have to kind of solve puzzles to put the boxes in specific spots. I like that it's really zoomed in here. I am concerned certainly on whether this is enough of a game. Effectively, this is a side-scrolling perspective on what you normally would see as a top-down cars and buses puzzle. And so there's a potential issue here. They're calling this a Sokoban game as like a box pushing game, but I really wouldn't agree with that. I'm gonna put that on the follow list though. There's a chance here that it's good. That's $2.99. It's got a bunch of languages. Here we have something just called Wandering Meat Bags that looks like an asset flip zombie shooter, although it's not particularly even showing a lot of shooting. And then we have a game called Timber Story here, which it might be something and it might be nothing. Kind of a great example of something that needs to be on the follow list, because I can't immediately reject it. Here we have a game called Rolling Over It, which is clearly a mobile phone game, doing the getting over it with Benet Foddy concept, but with rolling balls, or the Jumpman concept with rolling balls. It's $2.24, English only. I almost think that there might have been something wrong with my program, because we basically had no Gamatsu news and no Video Games Chronicles news. But also I can't really say that there's a lot of news. I can mention that people think that the Street Fighter 6 logo looks like it was just a modification of a very stock image. It just looks very generic. So my thought that it looked like a sneaker logo, not too off. People seemingly thoroughly unimpressed by the Street Fighter 6 teaser. This game, Shadow of Egypt, is just a Doom clone. So obviously that's not going anywhere. But I don't think there's too much news. Elden Ring came out, it was very highly critically reviewed, and then on Steam, last I heard, it's actually mixed because it doesn't have widescreen monitor support, which is really what they, I guess, wanted, and it has performance issues, and I think performance issues is really what they would have wanted. So this definitely feels like this is another great example of just mainstream video game journalists being completely out of line with their opinions as far as actual gamers, because mainstream video game journalists often are not given copies for the PC, instead given PlayStation or Xbox codes or copies of the games, and they often are playing unfinished builds, so they have been trained and tricked to basically ignore almost all bugs unless the game is incredibly buggy, and not even mention any bugs that they run into, because the video game companies that gave them early access for their access journalism promised them that the bugs would be fixed on the day one patch. Of course, that's always a lie. Never has there been a day one patch that has fixed 100% of all the bugs in a game. We do have GameDeveloper.com articles here. Iron Galaxy is going to open up a new Nashville office. Knockout City is going free to play and splitting from the original EA Originals. So it's going to take over publishing responsibility. I don't think anybody really played Knockout City, though. I guess Velen is able to wrangle back the ownership and rights for Knockout City. But I seriously doubt, even as a free-to-play game, even with a big push, there's very little chance that you're going to get a second bite at that apple of those launch day potential sales that you could have gotten. GameDeveloper.com says Ukrainian studios call for support, express defiance after Russia invasion. Which developers are even in Russia in Ukraine? Apparently the Stalker developer GSC Game World is based in the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv. The Sinking City developer Frog Wars is also in Kiev. Oh, yeah, it's Kiev, isn't it? On L and I. I'm still looking at the screen from 10 feet away, so sometimes I misread things. At least that's my excuse I'm sticking with at the moment. I don't know if there are any other companies that they could quote here. Nope. That's just those two. What the problem here with this article, I'd say, though, is you have this subtitle: "We hope for peace and, most importantly, freedom, and the whole civilized world should look for the same." You're not attributing this quote to anybody, and because of that, you're effectively dishonestly attributing it to all Ukrainian studios, as if they have one voice or one person who can speak for all of them. But then in the article, you've mentioned 2 Ukrainian studios. So was that a statement from Frogwares, or was that from GSC Game World? They don't clarify that at all. Let's see. GameDeveloper.com says Bandai Namco has acknowledged the Elden Ring performance issue on PC. The publisher has asked for patience as it works on a fix. By the way, also that whole remote code execution bug was needed to be fixed, and we hope was fixed before Elden Ring came out, but Bandai Namco clearly is still thinking old school by putting its focus on console versions of its game first and making PC gamers second-class citizens, whereas even Japanese companies, for the most part, are starting to shift towards making PC games on equal priority of the console versions of the game. I would very much want to see the console sales numbers in a week or two for Elden Ring to see if it is getting bought on the PS4 and PS5 a lot more than the Xbox Series X or Series S versus PC. I wouldn't be surprised if PC is the main platform for something like Elden Ring at this point. GameDeveloper.com also has this article: CD Projekt Amanita, State of Play, Krytevo, and more pledge financial aid to Ukrainians, which, okay. Donating money is about the only thing I think any big company could do, although at a certain point that there's a lot of room for donating money to somebody who's corrupt, or even donating money to a non-corrupt organization in Ukraine, and then Russia being able to seize those assets later on. So there is a danger there, and this is kind of a great example of where big corporations, even though they really would like to control the world, and in a lot of ways they do have way more influence around controlling the world, they don't have standing armies. They don't have private military contractors strong enough. The libertarian ideal here that everybody would have their own private security clearly does not work in a war. If the likes of every major company in the United States combined as much money as they could donate to Ukraine, they still probably could not spend as much or as efficiently as the US military could. And when a fight starts, diplomacy has already broken down, and economics as a form of diplomacy has really broken down. You can definitely donate financial aid if, like, Ukraine was hit with a storm or something, and it was a rebuilding effort, but Ukraine is at real risk of just being completely destroyed as an independent country. So money doesn't help that. And if at a certain point this goes to show how these companies feel the need to say something when they could have easily said, hey, we're a video game company, we can state our support or not state our support. At the end of the day, 10 years from now, if Ukraine was part of Russia again, or for the first time, these same companies would still be doing business with Russia, and they would be more than willing to bow down to the Kremlin, and that's kind of the problem of this too. Without getting into a long rant, is that if military manages to acquire a country, all the countries eventually do start to fall in line and do business with them, with the only exception really being like North Korea. But when you look at like the UAE and Saudi Arabia and just like even the Taliban taking over parts of the Middle East, like once the will to fight is gone, it's just back to normal as far as economics and diplomacy, and they just kind of hope people forget, and most people do forget. So yeah. See if this triggers. Moving on, Able Gamers Steven Spawn, that's a funny last name, and Dragon Quest Yuji Horii will be honored at the GDCA 2022. I don't recognize either one of these people, but they sound like good people to be honored. I don't know a lot about Able Gamers. Steven Spawn is the Senior Director of Development. He's receiving an Ambassador Award. And Dragon Quest creator Yuji Horii is receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award. So those sound like nice awards to give off. And then this one feels more like an advertisement than anything. Soaring to strangely familiar heights in Jet the Far Shores. Talking about Jet to Far Shores is kind of ridiculous because this is a fairly late period since the release of Jet to Far Shores. And I definitely don't go to GameDeveloper.com for reviews of games, which is about all I could call that. And then we've got our fall list cleanup, so we have this spelling game, which needs more time. We have Oracles here, which came out in August of 2021, which I'll give a little bit more time to. Let's see. Well, I'm doomed. We have RB and the Stars, which I think we can say no to this one, because it's just not visually polished enough and it just doesn't have really any chance of getting any reviews. Here we have a mixed game called Orange Cast Sci-Fi Space Action Game. Some of the visuals here look good, but they feel like they're all pre-rendered visuals, frankly. Yeah, 59% that can leave the fall list. Yeah, we have Opus Castle, which is mixed and is just a horror game. And it's free anyway, so that can leave the fall list. So even if this was like a student project, that should go. Let's see, here we have Open Rincia, The Stolen Sun. This, I think, is a VR game, but it can be played without VR. Single player. Dungeon crawler. It's from Zen Studios, the makers of Zen Pinball. Alright, so I'm going to add that to the wish list. Let's... Just kind of hoping we could get enough victories to get up one more rank. But I think that's probably as much as we would be able to do. We still need to activate a trap card. One more trap card. And then we should be good. I guess there is a slight desire to get all the daily quests done on a Friday. That way we could potentially build up the daily quest for Monday, but I don't even think it's that important. I do have enough gems at this point where I probably wouldn't want to get mates, and it probably would be a little too expensive to get all the fields, but it wouldn't be too crazy to get all the card backs. But I think I would want to put that off until the next expansion, which I assume the next expansion happens in 37 days, which is to say about another month, which means season 4, since every month is a season. And after doing everything, as far as getting cards from the festival, I don't really have any more extra cards to craft or to make. And to get to this Zodiac Tri-Bridge deck, I clearly would need, let's see, probably 30 of each of these. 30, 60, 90, 120 of these crafting points, and then 30, 60, 90 of these crafting points, and then 30, 60, 90, 120 of more of those crafting points. So yeah, when I get a bunch of card packs open in the next expansion, I might have a higher chance of going somewhere with that. Here we have a game called Operation Dogfight that I think I want to give a little bit more time to. It does have 8 user reviews, so maybe after a year it'll have 30, but I doubt it. Here we have Operation Armstrong, which I think I'll give a little bit more time to also. I'm not even really making a lot of decisions. I don't have to make that many decisions, honestly, because I've cleared out the fall list so well, particularly by rerunning the macro, that there's no real pressure to leave something for another 3 months, 6 months, a year. Here we have something called Only After, and if we're gonna play, we actually need to play. Okay, in the turn. So I'm gonna have to make a decision here on 5 user reviews as far as Only After is concerned. So let's look at the reviews. Positive, positive, got for free. Positive, 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 got for free. Interesting that that didn't bring up any reviews. And I clicked that, so their website's not working quite right. Alright, well, I'll make an executive decision, put this on the wish list. If I can get this for about $5 and it's a mediocre game that's lesser known, I'm willing to try that. And then we have a game here called Onirism, not to be confused with Oniism, which is just masturbation. Rated very positively here. Is this out of early access? No. It's 2019. Well, I like it, but I probably should leave it off the follow list. But just as an abandoned game, but I'll just leave it on the follow list. Then I guess I'll rerun my macro and just see if something weird happens. They're selling some kind of Borderlands clothing, watches and jackets, which, yeah, I guess that is an interesting thought as far as Borderlands still being fairly a big deal and the movie still being in the works. It very possibly is a case that people thought that the Steam Deck coming out on this Friday, which is a bad time for the embargo that really ends on a Friday, it shows that either Valve doesn't know when to put out a press release or they're trying to bury the story. Yeah, but maybe people just got out of the way of that announcement, and that caused a lack of new news, although it is also Friday, so it's not crazy. Lego Star Wars game has a video here showing off Coruscant. That's kind of like an animated GIF, which, yeah, I guess that's nice to see, you know? Let's see. But that is that. Now I will say Chrome has done something different and weird with all of my extensions. Like, they've made the input banner way bigger. And again, we'll just let this show. Well, actually I need to play, so we'll end the turn and then we'll let the macro show. So there it opens Game Developer. Here it's opening what's on Steam. Here it opens the Gamatsu article, and it's like clicking all of them, but none of those pages are opening. Okay, I see. Something has gone wrong there. As far as news stories. So we'll just have to kind of do that manually, and I'll have to figure out what's going on. It's probably a extra plugin that I have specifically designed to have these links when clicked opening in new tabs. That would be my guess as to what's not happening. The fact that it's working on what's on Steam, but it's not working on Gematsu or Video Games Chronicles is a little weird. This might be a case where some weird part of my code was copy and pasted wrong. For what did open, we have the last Steam game that was on the list, and then we have War in Outer Space, which obviously isn't going to make it to the fall list, and that's a new game. And we have Phonetic, which looks like it is just a text-based word game, so nothing there. And then we have Awakened Dark Space, which looks just like a horror game of no interest. And then we have the last game developer tab. And then we have another set of fall list games to check. This one's rated very positively, so it can go to the wish list. It is out of early access, right? This visual novel is overwhelmingly positive, so you can put that on the wish list. Ouija Rumors needs more time. This game, OD Housekeeper, needs to leave the follow list. This game needs more time, but I also think I could probably just remove it. I don't get how this is a game about palindromes. It's like color palindromes. That is a kind of different concept, so I'll leave that on the fall list. Here we have a dating sim game rated extremely positively, and the visual novel is highly unlikely to be on the like unfinished side, so I'll put that on the wish list. Early access sign. This guy's still thinking. Orwell's Animal Farm. I remember when this was announced and really didn't come out with much of fanfare. It is rated very positively, so I think there's relevance there and a reason there to play a video game covering a fairly important or popular book. We probably should have a few more games that are based off of books, even if they're just going to be linear kinetic visual novels. This Otharian project, is it out of early access? Looks like a Diablo clone, looks very much like a Diablo clone, but it's rated mostly positive, so that can go to the wish list also. This one, Open Orpiment. It's like a French game, it's still in early access. We'll leave that. Ori and the Will of Wisps. I really didn't love the first Ori, but it's relevant enough for me to put it on the wish list anyways. Although there is a potential question as to whether there's an Ultimate Edition of Ori and the Will of Wisps, or just the Ultimate Edition of Ori and the Blind Forest Definitive Edition. Yeah, because I have like the Definitive Edition and the original version of this, and I don't think I've played the Definitive Edition because there's not really a lot of reason to play it. It would just be the same game over again. And then we have a game here called Organs Please, which is Paper Please spin-off parody. Although it seems like there's a decent amount of game, but also it doesn't actually have a release date. So I think I'll remove that from the fall list. Also, right. That click worked. And that and that and that. Alright, so now I'm just going to manually open all the Gamatsu news, and I'm probably going to just not play any of Yu-Gi-Oh! I think we've got the daily quest done now. Yeah, come on. Seriously, did not activate a trap. I may just do that off screen. I might as well just click on this and show this while I'm doing it. There's actually quite a lot of articles that we should have covered, and for some reason this is not working. This might be, yeah, when I just clicked on the second page there, that opened a new thing, but I don't think that's actually how the macro runs. I think it does run that way. So I might have to make, or try to make, an exception for anything that is under the subfolder browse/page as far as Gamatsu. But that still wouldn't explain why the first page of links wouldn't open up. See, then when I clicked page 3, that opened to a whole nother another thing, another bit of news. We're going back further than we probably need to. Yeah, we've talked about everything else here. And let's see, let's go to video game. It's Chronicle, category news. And again, though I'm clicking on these links and they are popping up right, so yeah, there's something weird about the way the macro all of a sudden it not working after I just reprogrammed it, and it was working very well, which like goes to show how you potentially can just have real instability. I think we've talked about this, the rest of these articles. Yeah, there can be real instability with a program, particularly when you're programming something that's interacting with a website that can be different every time you load it. So we don't need that anymore. I'll leave that. Don't need that. We'll leave that. So I think it's worth mentioning that yes, you can check what games run in your Steam library, but what you can't do is there's no point on the store that actually says this runs on the Steam Deck and or a curated storefront. That would tell you, hey, here's a whole bunch of games you would want to buy. That would work very well with the Steam Deck. The best thing you could do is simply have some kind of curated list from some other source, or go to Steam plus Linux subcategory on the storefront. We were here a couple days ago, and without being able to look through all of them, it's really hard to tell what has changed. But I can say that at minimum, at least 8 games from my library have been tested, because this was at 1,400 and something a couple days ago. So let's be incredibly generous and say it was 1,499 games that had been untested a couple days ago, and now we're at the 1,399, so 100 games has been tested. I doubt it was that. I doubt it was even 50 games that were tested that also would overlap with games I have. So I would say probably 10 weeks, and most of the games will be tested. Tested really doesn't mean much. You could certainly have unpaid interns or QA testers, low-level QA testers, testing games on the Steam Deck very quickly and then giving back a very brief report, playing it for just like 5 minutes at most. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a lot of automation just to see, hey, does this crash on launch? And they may just be trying to automate the process there, starting with that, and then investigating further based on how popular games and how in demand the game is. And almost certainly some games that I have and people have on Steam will be very briefly tested or not tested at all, and just left as incompatible without any effort to fix it. A lot of it probably is just an automated system that emails the creators of the games, and in a lot of ways this might be a great system for Valve to get back in contact with a lot of developers and see if they respond to that email, and if they don't respond to that email, maybe start to kick them off of Steam. I don't want to see games disappearing from Steam, but if somebody is just taking the money and not even responding or updating their game, there's an argument there that it should be at least put in a sub-tier of this is abandonware or this feels like abandonware. Moving on, Video Games Chronicle says the rap musician Machine Gun Kelly will be playable in WWE 2K22. I've heard Machine Gun Kelly's name. I don't think I've ever seen him before. I don't recognize this person at all. I don't also know why he would be a playable character other than I guess his music is in the game. But even that still feels weird. Apparently Hunt Showdown is your gaming group's next favorite game, according to Video Games Chronicle. Nintendo continues its development expansion with an acquisition of a longtime partner, SRD. This deal is the last step in Nintendo's plan to expand its internal development capabilities, which honestly it could certainly do with that, because like developing hardware to get a better Switch 2 is what we all really kind of want. And frankly, just developing games and software is what we want to see from Nintendo. We just want them to do better and make more. That's all we ask. Let's see. March's Xbox Live games with gold have been confirmed. Let's look at the list. Flame in the Flood, Street Power Soccer, Sacred 2, Fallen Angel, and SpongeBob's Truth or Square. Not the interesting SpongeBob game. Let's see. Elden Ring's Day 1 patch has been detailed. Control improvements, bug fixes, and more. Plus news on Ray Tracing Edition is coming in the future, according to Bandai Namco. We really are at the point, though, where there's no reason for this game to have come out in the States. You could have delayed your game easily and not lost any sales. It's not like there's really any competition happening right now. The Not Safe for Work article here. This is the content that PlayStation censored in the horror game Martha is Dead. Maybe this will include pictures. I know there was a point where you're like cutting off her face and extracting a baby from her. Let's see. Well, they've made a video here. The face peeling scene, I think, still is in the game, but it is. Let's just start back here. I think not interactive. So this is, you're playing the character who's like the daughter of a German soldier in World War II, and you're in like Italy, I think, and your sister is dead, and this is an attempt at a very different kind of psychological horror type experience that we haven't seen done very often, or tried very often even in video game form. It's not probably too far away from what you might have expected, might have seen in like a Tales from the Crypt, or a how old is the character you're playing as? So she was dead and pregnant. And I guess you bury a pregnant person still pregnant. You don't cut out the baby and give it its own casket. I guess that would be weird. But yeah, that didn't seem particularly too gory for the likes of me, who is kind of used to horror elements. And then you have this split of dialogue. That might be the entire gameplay mechanic for Martha's Dead. Like, this game may sell very much more on controversy than it does on actual gameplay or even good story. Yep. There definitely were stories in like Twilight Zone and Tales from the Crypt and The Outer Limits that were pretty grotesque and horrific. In a lot of ways, this is just a dead body. And so what happened in the real world is she stole her identity. So the depiction here is instead this interactive, using a straight razor blade to cut off her face and peel it off. Making it interactive has more impact, and artistically it makes more sense to do that. And I can't, there is this concern, certainly this definitely would not be allowed in like Japan. This is far too gory for Zero. But there is a concern, certainly, that the developers of Martha is Dead is a more of an independent company, and they were not given the heads up or not given as much time as they would like to edit or censor these things as the game is almost released, and it was just going through the standard bug checking process that should happen. And then there is definitely speculation that maybe the low-level people at Sony said, all right, this content is rated appropriately, it's fine as long as the ESRB rates it, which I do believe this is an ESRB rated experience. Let's see if we can find the baby scene there. I think I probably shouldn't show the baby scene, because if they're willing to expose nipples here as you're cutting out a baby, they're probably willing to expose the vagina too. And yeah, sort of. She's wearing kind of an old-fashioned cloth pair of underwear, and now a pair of scissors is being stabbed into her abdomen, and it's interacting as you're kind of cutting upwards. The screen went totally red in this process. You're definitely not going to pull out a real baby from this that's alive. And I would also argue that they put the belly button on the character rather high. And then she just stuck her hand in and pulled out a two-headed baby monstrosity. And then let's see. Here we have a bunch of dolls on crucifixes and more kind of surreal horror. I don't want to sit through all of this though, not because it's making me uncomfortable, but frankly because it's taking too long. But yeah, if this was an avant-garde French or Italian film, which I believe this is an Italian company that made this game, it would be completely unacceptable for it to be censored. If this was Sony Pictures doing a limited release, limited publishing of an avant-garde horrific horror movie, it wouldn't be censored. And so I would definitely say video games should not be held to a different standard as a form of art. So the changes was the face peeling scene was no longer interactive. Scene where you open up the womb is no longer interactive. Option has been added to skip the censored scenes while they are playing. Disclaimer text at the start of the game has been updated and is now more sensitive, clearer, and includes a warning of miscarriage references. The Safe in Our World messages appears at the end, providing a link where help can be found for now also appears after the disclaimer at the start. And any mention of masturbation has been totally removed during the church chapter as voiceover and text. So there is a there's definitely this is just pure straight up censorship, even though it's kind of interactive censorship, and a lot of it is not interactive. Like you can't get back the interactive face peeling on the Sony version of this game without probably hacking it or modding it. And they always push censorship on the most disgusting of text, so nobody really fights censorship that much. And once they just move the bar and move the goalpost, then they start fighting for censorship of more generally accepted and wanted concept. Yeah, and there's a real question whether this was just like Jim Ryan, the guy in charge of Sony Interactive Entertainment, or some manager who stepped in and demanded this extra censorship at the last minute. So, yeah. Hanging scene is removed and the camera has a blur effect when focusing on the baby. If you want to censor the game even further, the face peeling scene is completely skipped. And it returns with her just holding the face. The wound cutting scene is totally skipped. The direct miscarriage scene is skipped. And the hanging scene is removed. Not skipped. I don't know why they would just say skipped again. And the camera has a blur effect on the focusing on the baby. And then the statement here is, it's with regret that we had to modify the experience for the PS5, PS4 versions with some elements no longer playable. Yep. I often wonder if people think I'm just crying, saying the moon is falling or the sky is falling, or crying wolf when I talk about censorship. But no, I have to say I was 100% right as being somebody who is totally against censorship and totally for the universal concept of free speech that on which the First Amendment in the U.S. Constitution was based, and wants to push free speech even further than what the Constitution guarantees. But yeah, there's definitely people out there trying to go in the opposite direction. And stifle artists. I would heavily encourage everyone to think, if you wanted to tell this story, if this is your actual story, if this is your history, Martha's Dead, if that was your story and you wanted to tell it, and it's deeply emotional and impactful, and it's sometimes scary and sometimes gory and sometimes horrific and sometimes just disgusting, and then someone else said, no, you can't tell your own story because that's not acceptable to me, how would you feel? Like, how would you feel as an artist being told you have to censor yourself? You probably wouldn't feel any different than any other artist. And almost certainly that makes you also a advocate for free speech. Moving on, this is a sharp 180. A new Pokemon presentation will take place on Sunday, which I guess on Monday then we'll maybe have something to talk about as far as Pokemon presents. Video Game Chronicle says the Ascent has been officially confirmed for the PS5 and PS4. Forza Horizon 5's first DLC could be arriving soon. Fallout New Vegas 2 is reportedly in very early talks at Microsoft. A journalist claims Obsidian could work on a sequel to the classic RPG. This is Jeff Grubb. Let's see, which is paywalled. I don't think Obsidian in general was the team that made Fallout 3 or Fallout 4. I'm not 100% sure that Obsidian made the first one. Yes, it did. So Obsidian made Fallout New Vegas. It would make a lot of sense, I think, with leveler heads if like, it would make a lot of sense if leveler heads at Microsoft did just hand over the Fallout series to Obsidian, particularly if New Vegas sells very well compared to Fallout 4 and Fallout 76 combined, and they just do their more narrative implementation of the Fallout universe. Moving on, Video Games Chronicle says classic games will reportedly be a major part of the PlayStation Game Pass rival, which is speculated to be in development. I'm not sure it's actually been officially confirmed. Another Grand Theft Auto, the Trilogy Definitive Edition patch is coming next week, but it's unclear what issues the patch will address. It's going to be really shocking if the Trilogy Definitive Edition actually becomes a Definitive Edition at some point in the future, and it actually is worth playing. Let's see. We had already talked about the Knockout City studio leaving EA behind, making the game free to play. A dodgeball player versus player game. Switch's latest Nintendo 64 update fixes Zelda's Water Temple Room. Some issues still remain, though. This is probably older thing. This War of Mine developer is donating all profits to the Ukrainian Red Cross, which I guess that would be about the best person to donate money to support the Ukraine. Is just an initial burst of resources for the Red Cross, although staggered releases of resources to the Red Cross might be a little bit better, because if everybody donates $1 million in the first couple of days and then the Red Cross has hundreds of millions of dollars, it's very likely that several $1 million might go missing of that, or they'll just spend everything and then have nothing the next week, the next month. Moving on, Elden Ring hits 764 concurrent Steam users, nearly 6 times what Dark Souls 3 ever got, which I guess that really goes to show that there's a lot of enthusiasm around Elden Ring, and I doubt much of it has to do with it being written by George R.R. Martin. It's probably just a sign of the times and a sign of the lack of competition for that style of game. It's too bad, though, that most people are not having a fun time with it, because Elden Ring PC performance issues led to a 40% negative reviews on Steam. Nearly half of the reviewers are critical of stuttering frame rates. So, yeah. And again, they mentioned that it has overwhelming critical praise. It is like the best reviewed game on OpenCritic at the moment. And we had already talked about this Gematsu article, and the opening movie of eBaseball's not big. Babylon's Fall and Nier Automata collaboration event has been announced. Check out that article if you're interested. The anime we had already talked about. Tempest 4000 is coming to the Switch and the Atari VCS on March 22. I don't know if the Atari VCS is actually out yet. The romance visual novel Meiki no Lupercalia for PS4 and Switch comes out on June 23rd in Japan. Another console visual novel. Also, the romance visual novel Ayoku no Ustia coming to the PS4 and Switch. Take note, this is probably from the same publisher, and they're not bothering to make PlayStation 5 versions of the game. At a certain level, that was also a problem with like the PlayStation 3, and even I think maybe a little bit to the PlayStation 2, is that a lot of the Japanese companies who are making Japanese games for the PlayStation were making PlayStation 1 or PlayStation 2 games even many years after the PlayStation 3 had come out. Particularly with the PlayStation 3's cell processor not being backward compatible. Gamatsu has the Shadow Warrior 3rd gameplay trailer if you want to check that out. The PlayStation Plus free games have been announced. Ghost Runner, Ark Survival Evolved, Sonic Racing, and what is the other one? Ghost of Tsushima Legends, which is apparently some standalone co-op multiplayer experience that I've never even heard of. Mages has teased Chaos Head Noah and Chaos Child double pack English release. This is almost certainly a visual novel. It was launched for the Switch in Japan on the 24th. The next Dragon Age is currently right in the middle of production, according to Gamatsu, according to the creators of Dragon Age. Loopers for the Switch launches June 2nd in Japan and includes English subtitles. We might be seeing some backsliding for where games do just get launched in Japan and have English subtitles and Japanese subtitles and simplified Chinese subtitles, and then people would have to import the game if they really wanted to play it. There is no real region locking on the Switch as far as I know. Octopath Traveler Champions of the Continent launches this summer in the West as a mobile game. Gunvolt Chronicles Luminous Avenger 9 2 DLC has a boss Jason Frundrick from Blaster Master 3. All of that was announced. That's a really long title. SD Gundam Battle Alliance first mobile suits and characters have been announced. I really have to question whether SD Gundam ever was popular, and definitely if it is still popular. Void Terrarium 2 concept trailer, first details and screenshots are out if you want to check that out on Gamatsu. Taito Milestones is going to become a series of like old emulated games that they're going to release, old Taito games. Battle Spirits Connected Battlers has its second trailer. This looks like a card game, which card games maybe are coming back into fashion a little bit more in Japan. They never really went away that much, but I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see a few of them come over to the West, and a few more made in Japan and in the East. THQ Nordic has acquired an animated content studio called Metric Minds. THQ Nordic / Embracer Group hasn't announced that many acquisitions lately. I wouldn't be surprised if they're starting to struggle with their funding. In a lot of ways, if THQ Nordic right now was acquiring all the companies that it acquired, instead of over the past 2 or 3 years that it acquired businesses, it probably would have saved a lot of money as the economy just got worse. And there might be an economics lesson in just sitting on a stockpile of money instead of acquiring companies when they're not as discounted as they might be. But how were you to know that the economy was going to get worse they were, I guess, betting on it staying the same or getting better. But I wouldn't be surprised if Embracer Group is starting to overcommit. And I really wouldn't be surprised if Embracer Group at some point in the next 10 years did just completely collapse under its own weight and got broken up again, just like THQ overcommitted and basically had to go bankrupt. And that's all Embracer Group is trying to do, is become THQ all over again, or at least it feels like it's trying to do that. Moving on, My Heroes 1 Justice 2 DLC character Midnight is announced. So, fans of My Heroes 1 Justice probably excited by that. We'd already talked about Nintendo to acquire SRD as they gain 100% of the shares. The Famitsu sales have been updated. We can see the Token Ranbu Warriors taking the top spot now, with Pokemon Legend Arceus taking the second spot. But Pokemon Legends Arceus sold a ton, and going from 100,000 to 80,000, and then immediately jumping down to Horizon Forbidden West at 40,000. Although if you add these two together, that gets you close. That gets you actually to over 80,000. Then you just have your standard stalwart sailors like Mario Kart. Next new thing would be King of Fighters 15, which sold 9,000 units for the PS4 and only 2,400 for the PS5. And then hardware sales still massive for the Switch, compared to like 80,000 units sold in the last week for the Switch, compared to PS5 selling only 23,000. Actually, Switch Lite would have brought it up to almost 100,000. Xbox Series S doing better than it ever has before, selling 2,000 units. But PlayStation 4 doing pretty poorly, selling only 11 units, and the 2DS selling 364 units. Xbox Series X selling less than 2,000. The PS5 Digital Edition, I guess there just isn't a PS5 Pro version. Instead, they went with the PS5 and then the digital versions. There is some confusion certainly in my mind, because there was a PS4 and a PS4 Pro, I think. But I don't see any numbers that count a PS4 Pro as being sold. Moving on, the Ascent is coming to the PS5 and PS4 on March 24th. It's already out for the Xbox One and Xbox Series and PC. Pokemon Present is set for February 27th again. Enclave HD launches this summer as a game. I'm trying to burn through the news here. I already talked about the live free games of Gold. The game Cult of the Lamb for the PS4, Xbox Series, PS5, Xbox One, and Switch has now confirmed what consoles it's coming to. And the name here sounds interesting. The actual game for Cult of the Lamb, I forget what it actually looked like, and we'd have to look through the blur here. I think it is kind of like this roguelike top-down hack and slash game. I wouldn't be surprised if it isn't somewhat similar to something like The Binding of Isaac. Moving on, Babylon's Fall Combat 101 trailer and screenshots are available if you want to check that out on Gamatsu. I already talked about Knockout City going free to play. Relayer's demo is now available in Japan and launches February 26th worldwide. Earth Defense Force 6 has its fourth trailer. We have just a little bit. Boca Game Studios founders have a Q&A video part 1 talking about Slitterhead inspirations, creatures, combat, and more. This is one of those hype interviews that probably isn't really worth reading or listening to. Notice they have these like stand-ins for Siren in the back, and these guys are sitting maybe 4.5 feet apart with no masks. So that is probably the level of carefulness that is being done in Japan offices around, which, yeah, everything kind of feels like it's going to get back to some form of a new normal with the whole pandemic. But I think part of the new normal is we're going to consistently have people blame the pandemic for probably years down the road, and some people are still going to be really cautious at all times, and a lot of people are going to be the opposite of cautious just to be spiteful or ridiculous next time there is some bug that comes out, some flu. Moving on to video game news. Ashwalkers, a survival journey for Switch, launches March 10th. This is, I think, a game I was trying to keep an eye on, but I don't know if it's actually PC supported. It doesn't seem to indicate it is anything but Switch. So I guess I'll likely never play it if it stays on the Switch. Even if I did get a Switch, it's probably not a big enough game to play on the Switch for me. If I do get a Switch, I'm going to play just like the mainstream Nintendo games, and that's it. I'm not going to spend a ton of time playing extra things. Let's see, we have World Champion Boxing Manager 2 announced for the PS4, Xbox One, Switch, and PC. Which I guess there was a World Championship Boxing Manager 1. I like the art here, but I don't generally like the idea of just a management game. That doesn't sound fun to me. And then Tencent acquired 1CE Entertainment, which I do recognize this logo. So Tencent trying to acquire a company here and there, as much as everybody else is trying to acquire a company here and there. Okay. Twitter, I imagine, is going to get fairly annoying too, with people tweeting out support of Ukraine. Video game companies tweeting out support. This really is a point where put up or shut up should definitely be the first rule. If you're not donating money in some way, you should not say anything. And even if you are donating money, maybe you shouldn't virtue signal. That would be probably a smart move too. I will say, if I can get slightly political, I've kind of gotten in here. Like Susan Wojcicki is retweeting Google Europe, who is actively monitoring the war in Ukraine. One of the things I think there is this danger of people saying they're against war, and then what people really mean by that is they're against Ukraine not just surrendering at the first site of invasion. I don't think most people mean that around the world, but there is definitely a possibility that a lot of the people in Russia will claim they meant that, as there have been protests against the war in Russia, which is probably very dangerous for them to protest. At least that's how it's depicted to everybody else around the world. But yeah, I think stronger, more clear words might be necessary. So don't fall into just hashtag against the war, no war. Sure, if you're a big old peacenik, I for the most part am a big old peacenik too, or at least I've leaned that way in my past. Being a pacifist, if you understand what pacifism really means and that you would be willing to just be murdered for your morals, is one thing, but actually being a pacifist for on someone else's behalf is pretty unethical too. So don't say no war. Yeah, you might have to stop people who are creating the war, and sadly that means potentially escalating and expanding a war. They called World War I the war to end all wars, I believe. And so we may once again have to go into major bloody conflict there. Militarily wise, a swift, even more aggressive response to an invasion is what the military would do. We see it with like police in the United States, like aggression and whatever the other person does, more aggression and just total and utter dominance. Yep. So I wouldn't be surprised if militaries around the world do fairly quickly decide that they need to actually intervene instead of just doing financial embargoes and slaps on the wrist. Because economically, like if we could have put a stranglehold on the finances of Vladimir Putin and the other oligarchs in Russia, why didn't we do that up until that point? What level of corruption allowed them to still be in charge? Or why didn't we do that immediately as soon as they invaded? It's not just going to be money. You can't just have a war around money. Like, yeah. And I think that's more than enough political talk. I tried really hard to limit it to 3 short rants in this stream. Ideally, going forward, we won't have too much more to report on this because it probably won't be video game related. That's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want a friend or follow me on any social media sites, there's a whole bunch of links down below. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.